Have you ever stood perfectly still while someone screamed for help just to save your own skin? I need you to understand that poverty doesn't just make you hungry, it makes you blind. It creates a specific type of tunnel vision where moral red flags look like opportunities and instinct sounds like paranoia. That is the only defense I have for what I did. That is the only reason I took the job at the Meridian. I was 24, drowning in student debt, and living out of a Corolla that smelled like stale fast food and despair. I had exhausted every gig app, every temp agency, every favor. So when I saw the listing for an aquatic safety supervisor paying $45 an hour, I didn't see a trap. I saw a lifeline. The listing was on a dark mode job board, the kind used for private security contracting. It was specific. They wanted a male, physically fit, with advanced CPR certification. But the bold text at the bottom was what stopped my scrolling. Candidate must possess no fluency in Spanish, monolingual English speakers only. Polygraph verification required. I stared at the screen. I grew up in a household where English was forbidden. My mother was from Guadalajara. She beat the Spanish grammar into me before I knew how to tie my shoes. I was fluent, native level. But for $45 an hour, I was willing to be whatever they wanted me to be. I applied, checking the English-only box with a finger that didn't even tremble. The interview wasn't at the hotel. It was at a law firm downtown, in a glass-walled room that felt more like an interrogation cell than an office. The man across from me, Mr. Vance, was terrifyingly nondescript. He wore a suit that cost more than my car, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. It just stretched his skin. "We value privacy above all else, Leo," Vance said, his voice smooth, like tires on wet pavement. "The Meridian hosts sensitive clientele, diplomats, high net worth individuals who require decompression without interaction. Your job isn't just safety, it's invisibility." He slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table. It was a Spanish text, a complex legal paragraph about liability. "Read this out loud for me," he commanded. My heart hammered against my ribs. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth. If I read it fluently, I was out. If I refused, I was out. I had to play the idiot. I picked it up, squinting. I butchered it. I mispronounced vowels, stumbled over the cadence, turning the beautiful language into a clumsy, anglicized mess. I sounded like a tourist trying to order a taco in Iowa. Vance watched me. He didn't blink. For a solid 10 seconds after I finished, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Then, he nodded. "Good. You start tonight. Shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I signed the NDA without reading it. I sold my soul for a signature. The Meridian wasn't a normal hotel. It was a brutalist concrete structure on the edge of the desert, miles from the nearest town. The pool area was enclosed in a massive, atrium-like structure with frosted glass ceilings. At night, it was a humid, echoing cavern, lit by underwater LEDs that turned the water a sickening, chemical turquoise. My station was an elevated chair, 10 feet in the air. From there, I could see everything. The pool, the hot tub, and the heavy steel door at the far end labeled Cabana Suites, authorized personnel only. The first week was agonizingly boring. The humidity made my shirt stick to my spine. The The smell of chlorine was so strong it burned my sinuses, masking everything else. But it was the acoustics that got to me. The room was designed to amplify sound. The hum of the filters sounded like a jet engine. A drop of water hitting the deck sounded like a gunshot. Every 45 seconds, the automatic skimmers would purge, creating a sucking, gurgling noise that made the hair on my arms stand up. I was instructed to never speak to the guests. If they approached me, I was to point to the signage. If they were drowning, I was to extract them, perform CPR, and radio security. That was it. The guests were strange. They never came alone. They were always escorted by men in blue polo shirts, the handlers. The guests themselves were diverse, young, old, men, women, but they all shared the same look. Vacant, wobbly, like they were walking underwater. They would swim mechanically, laps back and forth, while the handlers stood by the edge, arms crossed, watching. The first red flag that I couldn't ignore happened on the second Tuesday. It was 3 a.m. The air in the atrium was thick, suffocating. A young woman was in the pool. She was swimming aggressively, splashing water, breaking the calm surface. Her handler, a man with a thick neck and dead eyes, was on his phone near the exit. She swam to the edge nearest my tower. She gripped the gutter, her knuckles white. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, terrifyingly lucid. "Ayúdame," she whispered. "Por favor, señor. Me van a matar." "Please, sir, they're going to kill me." The word hit me like a physical blow. It was the Spanish I wasn't supposed to know. My stomach dropped. The instinct to respond, to ask what was happening, was overwhelming. But I remembered the polygraph threats. I remembered the $45 an hour. I remembered Vance's cold stare. I looked at her. I kept my face perfectly flat, a mask of bovine confusion. I tilted my head slightly, acting like I couldn't hear her over the filters. "No speak," I mouthed, pointing to my ear. The devastation in her face broke something inside me. She realized I was useless. She realized she was alone. Before she could say more, the handler was there. He didn't run. He walked with a terrifying, casual speed. He grabbed her by the hair, not violently, but with a firm, controlling grip, like handling livestock. "Time's up," he grunted in English. He hauled her out of the water. She went limp, defeated. As they walked her toward the steel door of the Cabana Suites, she looked back at me one last time. It wasn't a look of anger. It was pity. I spent the next 4 hours gripping the arms of my chair, shaking. I convinced myself she was crazy. I rationalized the horror away because I needed the money. But the pattern continued. Every night, different people, same look in their eyes, same hushed Spanish whispers when the handlers were distracted. They were testing the fences, and I was the fence. I realized then why the no Spanish rule existed. It wasn't to prevent me from talking to them. It was to prevent me from humanizing them. If I couldn't understand their stories, their pleas, their prayers, they remained just bodies in the water, liability risks. The horror wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was the bureaucracy of suffering. It was the realization that I was a paid accessory to something industrial. So breaking point came 3 weeks in. It was a Tuesday. The atmosphere was heavier than usual. The humidity was at 90%, creating a fog that hung over the water. The lights were dimmed. The steel door to the Cabana Suites burst open. A man ran out. He wasn't wearing swim trunks.
He was in dirty jeans and a torn t-shirt. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead. He was screaming, his voice echoing off the glass ceiling, shattering the hum of the ventilation. "Ahí están sacando los órganos. Es una carnicería. They are taking the organs. It's a slaughterhouse. Abre la puerta, por Dios. Open the door, for God's sake." I stood up in my tower. This wasn't a drill. This was violence. Two handlers emerged from the cabana. They didn't have guns. They had cattle prods, electric batons that crackled with a blue, malevolent arc. The man saw them and backed away, right toward the pool. He looked up at me.
Hermano, sé que entiendes. Debí reaccionar la otra noche. Ayúdame.
Brother, I know you understand. I saw you react the other night. Help me. He had seen my micro-expression. He knew. The handlers were closing in. The man jumped into the water, thinking it was safe. But he couldn't swim. The heavy denim dragged him down immediately. He thrashed, the water turning into a frothing turmoil. This was my job. Aquatic safety. I had no choice. I blew my whistle, a shrill, useless sound in the cavern, and dove. The water was warm, like blood. I opened my eyes underwater. The LEDs illuminated the man sinking. I grabbed him around the chest, surfacing, gasping, dragging him to the edge. "I got him!" I yelled in English, heaving his weight onto the deck. "Call 911!" The man was coughing, spitting water. He grabbed my arm, his nails digging into my skin.
No dejes que me lleven,
he sobbed into my ear. "Don't let them take me." I looked up. The two handlers were standing directly over us. They weren't calling 911. One of them, a man named Kale, clicked his radio. "Containment breach, pool deck, asset secure." Kale looked at me. He didn't look grateful. He looked bored. "Good save, Leo. Step away from the guest. He's having an episode." "He's bleeding," I said, my voice trembling. "He needs an ambulance." "He needs his medication," Kale corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "Step away." The man on the ground tightened his grip on me. Diles lo que dije. Tell them what I said. I looked at the man. I looked at Kale's baton. I looked at the security cameras. I stood up. I stepped back. I shook the man's hand off my arm. I don't know what he's saying," I stammered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "He's just screaming gibberish." The man on the floor stared at me. The light went out of his eyes. Not death, something worse. Total resignation. Kale smiled. It was a terrifying, approving smile. "Good man, Leo. Go to the break room. Mr. Vance wants to see you." They dragged the man back to the cabana suites. He didn't scream anymore. The only sound was his heels squeaking on the wet tile. I walked to the office. Mr. Vance was sitting behind his desk, watching a monitor. It was a live feed of the pool deck. But it wasn't the feed I saw on the security screens. This was high definition, audio-enabled. He paused the video. It was the moment the man had whispered in my ear. Vance turned his chair to face me. The room was freezing cold. "Sit down, Leo." I sat. The leather chair groaned. "You're a good lifeguard," Vance said. "Physical courage is common. We can buy muscle anywhere. But moral flexibility? That is a rare commodity." "I don't understand," I whispered. "We knew," Vance said softly. He pressed a button. A recording played.
It was audio from the waiting room before the interview, when I had called my mother. I had spoken to her in Spanish for 30 seconds. "We knew you were fluent before you even walked in the door. The no Spanish rule wasn't a requirement for the job, Leo. It was the test." My blood ran cold. "We don't need people who can't understand the assets," Vance continued. "We need people who can understand them and choose to do nothing. We need complicity. We need witnesses who are smart enough to know the truth and selfish enough to keep it quiet." He slid a tablet across the desk. $10,000 had been deposited into my account. "You looked a victim in the eye, understood his plea for life, and played dumb to save your paycheck." I felt bile rise in my throat. "I want to quit." Vance laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "You can't quit, Leo. You're an accessory now. You're on camera dragging a fleeing victim back to his captors. You're on payroll. You're deep in the mud with us."
Have you ever realized, in a moment of pure clarity, that the person holding the flashlight isn't there to guide you to safety, but to make sure you don't find the exit? The sound of a deadbolt sliding home is usually comforting. It is a mechanical promise of safety, a steel barrier between you and the chaos of the outside world. But memory is a sensory thing. When I hear that sound now, the heavy thud click of a deadbolt, I don't feel safe. I taste blood. I feel the cold, jagged edge of a ceramic shard digging into my palm. And I smell the overwhelming, cloying scent of peppermint and gun oil. Because the last time I heard that lock slide shut, it wasn't keeping the danger out. It was sealing me in with it. It was late October. My sister, Clara, lived in one of those architectural glass box homes in the Pacific Northwest, nestled deep in a valley where the sun disappears by 3 p.m. behind the ridgeline. She was flying to Tokyo for business, a 10-day trip, and she needed someone to watch her Weimaraner, Kaiser. I was between apartments and working remotely, so the arrangement felt like a vacation. A free stay in a luxury home, high-speed internet, and a dog who mostly slept. I arrived on a Tuesday morning. The air up there was thin and smelled of wet pine and decaying leaves. As I unloaded my car, a white pickup truck crunched up the gravel driveway. The man who stepped out looked like the archetype of rural reliability. Late 50s, flannel shirt, a calm, weathered face, and hands that looked like they could fix anything. "You must be Marcus," he said. "I'm Silas. I handle the maintenance for Clara and a few of the other properties out here. Just wanted to introduce myself before the storm rolls in later." He handed me a card. Valley Property Management. He was polite, professional. He pointed out a loose gutter he planned to fix the next week, and mentioned that cell service was spotty during rains, but the landline always worked. He even had a biscuit in his pocket for Kaiser. But Kaiser, a dog who usually greeted strangers with a tail that acted like a whip, didn't take it. He stood by my leg, pressing his lean body against my thigh, letting out a low, vibrating growl that I felt in my bones more than I heard. "He's just moody," I apologized. Silas smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It just moved his mouth. "Doc sensed the pressure change," he said. "If you need anything at all, my cabin is just a half-mile down the ridge. I'm the emergency contact on the fridge." He left, and I settled in. The house was beautiful but unnerving. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass. During the day, It was like living in a nature documentary. But as evening approached, the glass turned into black mirrors. You couldn't see out, but anyone in the woods could see everything in. The first 2 days were uneventful, but the atmosphere was heavy. The silence in that valley was aggressive. It wasn't just a lack of noise, it was a presence. I set up my workspace in the living room, facing the tree line. Kaiser spent the entire time pacing. He wouldn't settle. Every 40 minutes or so, he would stop, ears pricked forward, staring intently at the ceiling, specifically at the vents of the HVAC system. I brushed it off. Old house noises, settling timber. On Thursday afternoon, I took Kaiser for a walk along the perimeter trail. The woods were grey and stripped bare. We were about a mile out when Kaiser stopped dead. He wasn't looking into the woods. He was looking back toward the house. The fur along his spine stood up in a rigid ridge. I tugged the leash. "Come on, buddy." He wouldn't move. I looked back at the house, visible through the skeletal trees. It looked empty, a dark jewel box on the hill. But then, a flash of motion caught my eye. The second-floor master bedroom, Clara's room. The curtains, which I had left open, were now drawn shut. A cold prickle of adrenaline washed over my neck. I convinced myself I was wrong. Maybe I had closed them? The mind does strange things in isolation. I dragged Kaiser back, but the walk back felt like a march into enemy territory. The silence of the woods felt staged, like everyone was holding their breath watching me. When I got inside, the house felt different. The air was warmer, as if the heat had been cranked up. I checked the thermostat. It was set to 75. I had left it at 68. Panic is a slow creeper. I checked the doors, locked. I checked the windows, secure. I went upstairs to Clara's room. The curtains were drawn. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I hadn't closed them. I knew I hadn't. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but the signal bars were empty. No service. I remembered the landline in the kitchen. I picked up the receiver. No dial tone, just a soft, rhythmic clicking, breathing on the line. Click, click, click. I slammed the phone down. The sun was setting. The glass walls were turning into mirrors again. I was exposed. Then, the doorbell rang. The sound shattered the silence like a gunshot. I jumped, nearly dropping a kitchen knife I had instinctively grabbed. I moved to the foyer and peered through the peephole. It was Silas. He was standing on the porch, a heavy flashlight in one hand, looking concerned. I unlocked the door, flooding with relief. "Marcus?" he asked, his voice calm, an anchor in the storm. "I saw the lights flickering from down the road. Thought the generator might be acting up. You okay? You look pale." "Someone's been in the house," I blurted out. "The thermostat changed, the curtains moved. The phone is dead." Silas's expression shifted instantly from neighborly concern to professional alertness. "Stay here," he ordered gently. "I'm going to do a perimeter sweep. Lock this door behind me." He stepped off the porch. I watched his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping under the deck, checking the bushes. Seeing him out there, a man who knew the land, who knew the house, made me feel foolish, but safe. 5 minutes later, he knocked. "Perimeter's clear," he said as I let him back in. But the phone line was cut at the junction box outside.
Looks like wind damage, or maybe an animal. But given how spooked you are, I'm not taking chances. I'm armed, Marcus. I'll stay until morning. He pulled a heavy revolver from his waistband and set it on the kitchen island. The sight of the gun was terrifying, but his presence was reassuring. He was the authority. He was the protector. "Make some tea," Silas said, walking toward the living room. "I'm going to check the basement access." I turned to the kettle, my hands shaking. Kaiser was in the corner. He wasn't looking at the basement door where Silas had gone. He was looking at me, pleading. I filled the kettle. The water rushing into the metal pot was the only sound. As I reached for a mug, I froze. The cabinet was open. Clara kept her mugs organized by color. I had used a blue one earlier. It was now back in the cabinet, washed and dried. I hadn't washed it. A wave of nausea hit me. I looked at the counter. The coaster I had used was perfectly square with the edge of the table. I am messy. I don't align coasters. My mind raced back to the red flags, the dog staring at the vents, the thermostat, the curtains. Silas walked back into the kitchen. He moved silently for a big man. "Basement is secure," he said. He leaned against the counter, too comfortable, too at home. "Which tea do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Clara usually has the Earl Grey in the tin behind the flower," he said. My blood turned to ice. The flower jar was huge, opaque ceramic. You couldn't see behind it. And the tea tin was hidden there because Clara hated visual clutter. It wasn't a place a handyman would know. It was a place someone who lived there would know. I looked at Silas. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat, dead things. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the knife block. "You've been here the whole time," I whispered. It wasn't a question.
The mask slipped. The helpful neighbor dissolved. His posture shifted, becoming predatory, relaxed. "The crawl space runs under the HVAC system," he said softly. "The acoustics are amazing. You can hear a heartbeat through the floorboards if you listen close enough." He lunged. I threw the boiling kettle at him. He roared, deflecting the scalding water with his arm. But it gave me a second. I scrambled over the island, crashing into the bar stools. Kaiser exploded from the corner. The dog didn't bark, he just launched himself at Silas. Silas didn't panic. He swung the heavy flashlight with practiced, brutal efficiency. Crack. The sound of the heavy mag light hitting the dog's skull was sickeningly wet. Kaiser dropped without a sound, convulsing on the floor. "Bad dog," Silas grunted, shaking his arm. I ran for the back door. I grabbed the handle. Locked. I fumbled for the deadbolt. "I changed the cylinders yesterday while you were working," Silas said. He was walking toward me, not running. He knew I had nowhere to go. "That key doesn't work anymore." He held up a small, brass key. "Strictly for management." I backed up, hitting the glass wall. The reflection showed my own terror and Silas approaching, the knife from the island now in his hand. He wasn't rushing. He was savoring it. "Why?" I choked out. "Clara travels so much," he said, conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "It's a shame to let such a nice life go to waste. I've learned so much about her. About you. You type too loud, Marcus." He swiped.
I dodged, but the blade sliced my forearm. The pain was hot and immediate. I grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from the side table and swung it with everything I had. It connected with his shoulder, shattering. He stumbled back, dropping the knife. I didn't wait. I grabbed a dining chair and hurled it through the floor-to-ceiling window. The glass exploded outward into the night. I dove through the jagged hole, shredding my clothes and skin on the frame. I hit the cold dirt and scrambled up, sprinting into the pitch-black woods. I didn't stop running until I hit the main highway, 3 miles down the mountain. A trucker found me walking down the center line, covered in blood, shivering violently. The police arrived at the house 40 minutes later. Silas was gone, but they found his nest. In the crawl space, directly under the guest room where I had been sleeping, they found a sleeping bag, a bucket, and a laptop. The laptop was connected to the house's internal network. He had access to the webcams on my laptop. He had been watching me work. He had been watching me sleep. They found a logbook, too. It detailed Clara's schedule for the last 2 years. It detailed my schedule for the last 3 days. Entries like, target asleep 11:04 p.m., respiration steady, or target agitated, suspects. Kaiser survived, but he was never the same. He has brain damage. He walks in circles and snaps at shadows. Clara sold the house a month later. They never caught Silas. It turns out Silas wasn't his real name. He wasn't the property manager. The real property manager had been found in a ravine 2 weeks prior. The man I let into the house, the man I made tea for, was a drifter who had assumed the identity to get inside. I live in a city now, 4th floor, heavy steel door. But sometimes, when the apartment is quiet, I hear a creak in the floorboards, and I freeze. I check the vents. I check the locks. Because I know that monsters don't hide under the bed. They stand on your porch. They smile. They offer to help. And they wait for you to invite them in.